makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Kathy, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the May 3rd issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Voting ruling could incite endless redistricting wars. Fair representation and power of voters are probable casualties in Hell of Maps. By Nick Corsentini. The Supreme Court's decision to upend a key provision of the Voting Rights Act has plunged the nation into a dizzying new era of partisan conflict, most likely ushering in a forever redistricting war that could produce fewer competitive seats in Congress and further polarize American politics. Left as probable casualties are longstanding principles of fair representation, along with American voters, who are likelier now to be shunted into hyper-partisan districts drawn in each state to benefit the party in power. A great carving could effectively dilute the power of millions, especially minority voters, and make partisan primaries more important than general elections when it comes to choosing leaders. We lost one of the last seatbelts of our democracy, said Alana Odoms, Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Louisiana. The ruling by the court's conservative majority struck down Louisiana's congressional map, describing it as an unconstitutional gerrymander that improperly considered race to create a majority black district. The ruling, Democrats argued, effectively removed one of the final guardrails that kept the most ruthlessly partisan interests at bay when it came to drawing the congressional and legislative maps. Some also fear that the court's decision will reverberate beyond the halls of Congress. Judges, school board members, councilmen, doesn't matter, it will affect them all. Press Robinson, a Louisiana resident who pushed for more minority representation in the state's congressional map, said on Wednesday. More broadly, minority voters fear a backslide after losing what they say was a critical legal protection. Black Americans have never been fully represented in the electoral process, said Damon Hewitt, the president of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, a civil rights group. This ruling will make it less likely that we ever will. In the court's majority opinion, Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. cast the ruling as a limited one that preserved a central tenet of the Voting Rights Act while also addressing a separate matter of fairness, the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, which he said Louisiana's majority-minority district violated. Congressional maps are supposed to be drawn once a decade to account for population shifts and ensure fair representation. But last year, President Trump started a rare mid-decade gerrymandering arms race when he asked Texas officials to create a new map to benefit Republicans in what was widely anticipated to be a difficult midterm cycle for the party. California countered with a map favoring Democrats. Several other red and blue states followed. The court's decision on Wednesday has already prompted Louisiana and several other states to reconsider new maps in time for this year's midterms. Still others are considering a fresh round of redistricting ahead of 2028. Election lawyers in both parties are contemplating a host of legal challenges as officials try to understand the Supreme Court's new guidelines. A cold-blooded consensus has emerged among Democrats and Republicans as both parties battle purely for power, casting aside long-standing principles of fair representation that previously informed the redistricting process. Maximum warfare everywhere all the time, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat from New York and the House Minority Leader, said recently. He was echoing an adage first preferred by allies of Mr. Trump last year. Such aggressive gamesmanship in redistricting could run roughshod over long-standing norms for drawing maps, such as keeping communities of interest together, maintaining a geographic compactness, and protecting the voting power of minority voters. A preview of this polarized future is already evident in the newly drawn districts in Florida and Virginia, where lopsided control of congressional seats will no longer reflect the partisan makeup of each state's electorate. In Florida, Republicans could hold 24 of 28 congressional seats after they approved a new map last week that was drawn in anticipation of the Supreme Court's decision. The math is stark. In a state where Vice President Kamala Harris won 43% of the vote 2 years ago, the GOP could control 86% of House seats. Democratic state lawmakers mentioned that lopsided statistic often on Wednesday as they tried unsuccessfully to stop the new map. You think that this is just about preserving a Republican majority in the midterm, State Representative Fentrice Driscoll of Tampa, the House Minority Leader, told Republican colleagues. I stopped by to tell you today that you are destroying democracy with this vote. Yet Democrats did something similar in Virginia last month, most likely giving their party 10 of the state's 11 congressional seats, or 90% of the congressional delegation, in a state where Mr. Trump won 46% of the vote. Republicans in the state seized on the disparity and how it would dilute the voting power of conservative voters. Jason Miyares, the former Republican state attorney general, accused Democrats of trying to silence millions of conservative voices through deceit and an unconstitutional power grab. While such comparisons fail to take into account some factors that go into map drawing, such as how a party's voters are dispersed through a given area, the overall trend points to distorted representation in Congress. Some states are even discussing how to achieve single-party control in their House delegations. Hours after the court's decision, Republicans across the South called for the elimination of majority black districts, all of which Democrats currently control. In Tennessee, Representative Diana Harshbarger, a Republican, said the state's last Democratic-held district, a majority black one in the Memphis area, was created to comply with a now outdated interpretation of the Voting Rights Act. The decision opens the door for Tennessee to draw a new map, she said. Since the ruling, Mr. Trump has encouraged state Republicans to move quickly to improve their political fortunes in the fall elections. This should give us one extra seat and help save our country from the radical left Democrats, Mr. Trump wrote on social media on Thursday in an exhortation for Governor Bill Lee of Tennessee to take action. Thank you, Governor Lee. Push hard. In response, Democrats threatened mutually assured destruction. I have long felt that we all have to play by the same set of rules, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Democrat from New York, told reporters on Wednesday. If Republicans are going to redraw North Carolina, if they're going to redraw Texas, if they're going to redraw and gerrymander every one of their states, then unfortunately we have to provide balance to that until we get to the day when we can all finally agree to put this behind us. Representative Terry Sewell, a Democratic House member from Alabama and a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, was more blunt. I'd take 52 seats from California, Ms. Sewell said, a reference to turning all 52 seats in California blue. I sure would, and 17 seats from Illinois. When districts are drawn to protect incumbents and carve out clear, safe partisan advantages, competition is often a casualty. After the last round of nationwide redistricting in 2021, when both parties sought to protect their current advantages, competition quickly became an endangered species. About a third of the current members of the House ran unopposed in their primaries. All but 12 of those districts were considered safe seats, meaning 124 House members essentially faced no challenge to their re-election. Close races are rare. Just 8% of congressional races, 36 of 435, were decided by fewer than 5 percentage points, according to a New York Times analysis last year. Consequences from the death of competition are readily apparent. Roughly 90% of races are now decided not by general election voters in November, but by the partisans who tend to vote in primaries months earlier, according to the analysis. The trend continues down the ballot, where state legislative districts are often heavily gerrymandered. More than 3/4 of state legislative primary races in 2024 were uncontested, according to voting data from the Associated Press. Just 7% of general election state legislative races, 400 of 5,465, were decided by fewer than 5 points. Spirit, pioneer of cheap fares, ceases flying, by Neeraj Chokshi. Spirit Airlines reshaped aviation in the United States by stripping down flying to its essentials and selling what were often the cheapest tickets around. But the airline shut down for good on Saturday, a victim of the rising costs it once excelled at controlling. In a statement just after 2 a.m., Spirit said it had canceled all flights and told passengers not to go to the airport. On the airline's homepage, a bright yellow banner declared that the airline was winding down all operations. The budget airline had lost billions of dollars in recent years as it struggled with competition at its most important airports, Las Vegas, Florida, and New York among them, and rising labor and aircraft maintenance costs. As a result, Spirit filed for bankruptcy in 2024 and again in 2025. It had aimed to emerge from the second bankruptcy this summer as a smaller company, but those plans fell apart as jet fuel prices rose dramatically in recent weeks, a consequence of the U.S. and Israeli war with Iran. The Trump administration started an 11th-hour effort to provide Spirit a lifeline, but government officials and the airline's creditors could not reach a deal in time to save the company. The proposed bailout faced resistance from investors, in part because the Trump administration had demanded that the government have the first claim to Spirit's assets if the airline ultimately failed. That would have left other investors that had lent money to the airline with little or nothing. The airline's lenders had put forward their own counterproposal that would have given the lenders better terms than in a government deal, according to people familiar with the situation, but the parties could not reach a deal. In a letter on Thursday to Spirit Airlines, the creditors said they did not see how the company could survive and urged Spirit's board to begin winding down its business, according to a copy reviewed by the New York Times. The shutdown leaves 17,000 full and part-time Spirit employees without work and tens of thousands of customers without flights. Spirit said it would automatically issue refunds for tickets purchased on credit or debit cards and was working to get more than 1,300 flight crew members home. Many other airlines said they would offer affected travelers discounted prices on flights to and from the airports that Spirit served. Some said that they would help stranded Spirit employees get home, and United Airlines invited them to apply for jobs. Spirit said it safely flew more than 50,000 passengers on Friday. Spirit Flight 1833, the airline's last, departed from Detroit late in the evening and landed in Dallas after midnight local time. LaGuardia Airport's Terminal A, where Spirit was the only commercial airline, was quiet Saturday morning, save for TV crews and a handful of passengers who showed up for their flights, not realizing the airline had shut down. Danny Nunez, 50, was headed home to Orlando for a pre-commencement ceremony for his MBA program on Saturday afternoon. He made it past the signs on the terminal doors announcing that Spirit had shut down and to a check-in kiosk, which let him enter his flight information before he realized something was amiss. Instead of his boarding pass, the kiosk printed an error message: "Please bring to an agent." But there were no agents. Posted notices alerted customers that customer service is no longer available. At Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Spirit's customers appeared to have received the message: the airline's check-in area was deserted. Spirit has been widely credited with democratizing air travel in the United States by keeping costs and ticket prices very low. The approach served Spirit well for years, generating huge profits. But competition from larger airlines and rising costs, particularly for pilots and other professionals, hobbled the company after the pandemic. It also suffered disproportionately from industry-wide engine problems. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Spirit played an important role in expanding access to affordable travel and bringing more low fares to more people. Bobby Schroeder, the chief commercial officer of a rival Frontier Airlines, said in a statement announcing discounted fares for affected travelers. In an interview this past week, Scott Kirby, the chief executive of United Airlines, said Spirit's problems predated the current rise in fuel prices. They were in trouble well before this, and well-run airlines are able to be profitable even in this environment, he said. He also criticized Spirit's business model, saying it was fundamentally flawed because it was based on treating customers poorly. While Spirit was particularly affected by rising competition and costs, other budget airlines have also struggled financially in recent years. This past week, the Association of Value Airlines, a trade group representing low-cost airlines including Spirit and Frontier, asked the Trump administration for $2.5 billion in aid to offset higher jet fuel costs, which have risen by about 65% since the war in Iran began. Airlines for America, which represents larger carriers, said in a statement that such aid would punish other airlines that have engaged in self-help. In a news conference on Saturday, Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, said he did not believe the aid was necessary yet. If they want to come to the U.S. government, we would be a lender of last resort, he said at the news conference at Newark Liberty International Airport. If they can find dollars in the private markets, I think that's better for them. Spirit was founded in Michigan in the 1960s as a trucking company. In the 1990s, it started offering charter flights. Then, in the next decade, it started to upend the airline business. In 2006, Indigo Partners, a private equity fund that specializes in budget airlines, acquired a majority stake in Spirit. The airline adopted the business model made famous by Ryanair, the European carrier, and focused on reducing costs, selling cheap tickets, and offering bare-bones service. One of the main proponents of that strategy was Ben Baldanza, who spent a decade as Spirit's chief executive. During his tenure, the airline generated big profits. Mr. Baldanza, who died in 2024, was proud of Spirit's no-frills approach, which the airline highlighted in sometimes provocative advertising. Spirit became the subject of jokes on late-night talk shows and frustrated many travelers by charging fees for services that other airlines provided for free, such as printed boarding passes, carry-on bags, and the ability to choose a seat. But Spirit's approach worked and forced other airlines to make big changes. Experts in aviation and economics say Spirit's low fares helped to make air travel accessible to more people. Its decision to fly to an airport often prompted other carriers operating there to lower prices. That was one of the main reasons that a federal judge sided with the Biden administration's Justice Department in blocking Spirit's plan to merge with JetBlue Airways in 2024. In eliminating Spirit from the marketplace, the proposed transaction would, by definition, dampen Spirit's disruptive force, the judge wrote in his ruling. Some have criticized the Biden administration for thwarting the merger, but JetBlue has also struggled to turn a profit for years, and aviation experts say there is no guarantee that a combination of the two airlines would have been profitable. Airline mergers are hard to pull off well and are often marred by major problems. As Spirit grew, it expanded into airports served by major airlines, which in turn adopted some of Spirit's tactics to compete with it. In 2012, Delta Airlines introduced lower but restrictive basic economy fares that were in the same ballpark as the fares that Spirit and other budget airlines offered. Later, United Airlines and American Airlines rolled out similar basic tickets. As a result, many people who previously flew on Spirit began to book tickets on larger airlines, which could also lure them with more frequent service, shorter waits between connecting flights, and more alternatives if flights were canceled. Cuts to violence prevention programs threaten progress. Leaders are scrambling to find funding outlets. By Shayla Colon. Derek Sanders feared that if he did not return to the corner of Atlanta's English Avenue neighborhood, more bodies would drop. Mr. Sanders had been a street outreach worker for the Offender Alumni Association, but he was laid off late last year after the organization lost $1.5 million in federal funds and was disbanded. Then murders surged. There were 4 killings the next month, Mr. Sanders said. All deaths he believes were preventable. One of the victims had been a participant in the Offenders Alumni Association, the program where Mr. Sanders worked de-escalate conflicts and mentoring people at risk of committing violence. He had engaged regularly with 2 of the other victims in the community. When we were there to mediate situations, they would listen. We came to an agreement, he said, but when we left, that agreement left with us. After violent crime worsened alongside COVID-19, the federal government passed legislation that included hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for community violence interventions. Community leaders and experts on crime nationwide have given some credit to these programs for helping bring homicides to historical lows in the years since. But the Trump administration withheld much of this funding upon retaking office in 2025, leaving many programs scrambling to find alternative sources of support and community leaders uncertain if they can sustain the progress. Violence prevention programs began taking root in America after lethal violence skyrocketed in the early 1990s. A new idea took shape in cities around the country. Treat violence like a disease and combat it with public health techniques. The first step to interrupt the transmission, said Kwame Thompson, a violence interrupter with Stand Up to Violence in the Bronx for 11 years. Then intervene with people in the community who are at high risk of perpetuating violence. We identify them, Mr. Thompson said, and we work to help change their norms. Local governments and philanthropists funded pilots in cities such as Chicago and Boston, which were largely led by grassroots groups focused on providing resources to vulnerable people. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, homicide rates nationwide gradually but significantly fell from their heights in the 1990s. Then, violence surged again during the pandemic. Community groups pushed to get relief funds for violence prevention and intervention strategies. With the passage of the American Rescue Plan and the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, programs around the country could apply for federal funds. By 2023, the Biden administration had created a General Office of Gun Violence Prevention and invested more than $42 billion, according to Gregory Jackson, a former deputy director of the office. With the federal support, states and municipalities established violence prevention offices, augmenting the work of police departments with programs focused on street outreach, hospitals, schools, and other community pillars. The goal was truly to build out the prevention work, said Rob Wilcox, a former deputy director of the White House's now shuttered Office of Gun Violence Prevention, adding that the funds would also help law enforcement personnel solve homicides and provide support for victim services. That's such a new and expansive way to think about how we address this crisis. Since 2022, the steep drop in homicides across the country have given credence to the effectiveness of the newly robust violence prevention paradigm. Last year, Baltimore had its lowest homicide rate in 50 years. Los Angeles experienced a nearly 20% drop in homicides, which Mayor Karen Bass said was driven by the city's comprehensive approach to public safety. But researchers have struggled to tie these improvements directly to the programs. The community violence interventions is so much about developing relationships with people who understandably distrust almost anybody coming to knock at the door, said Shawnee A.L. Buggs, advisory chair at the Black and Brown Collective for Community Solutions to Gun Violence. How you measure that kind of change is challenging, and that's something that the field is still figuring out. Despite the constraints, some research supports the idea that these approaches can be cost-effective. A study by the University of California, Berkeley, found that for every dollar a prevention program called Advanced Peace spent on intervention, cities in California that implemented the program saved more than $18 in spending on law enforcement, emergency services, and other shooting-related costs. Another study produced by the Center for Gun Violence Solutions and the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health linked Baltimore's Safe Streets program to a 32% reduction in homicides, finding that every dollar invested in it had averted $7 to $19 in costs. I do believe that a lot of these programs have an effect, but we have to contend with the fact that the evidence is really weak for these programs on their own, said Ben Struhl, Executive Director of the Crime and Justice Policy Lab at the University of Pennsylvania. The evidence is strong for citywide strategies that contain these programs. Interventions can also be victims of their own success. Less violence can mean less urgency to spend money on preventing it. You got to have support from local officials, said Rodney McIntosh, a violence prevention worker in Fort Worth. We know we save lives, but yet we have to fight every year just to be a part of the public safety ecosystem. Now, sweeping funding cuts at the federal level are hindering support for community violence interventions. A spokeswoman for the Department of Justice said it was committed to directly supporting law enforcement and victims to improve public safety and ensure the efficient use of taxpayer dollars. Some federal funds are still available, but they are scarce and require recipients to work with immigration enforcement officers, conditions that are deal breakers for some. Programs that were actively preventing shootings are now paused or dismantled, said Monique Williams, Chief Executive Officer of Cure Violence Global. You have trained staff who are now laid off and trusted relationships in neighborhoods that are now broken. Programs that have managed to overcome cuts are leaning more heavily on local resources for support. Some cities and states have stepped in to make up for the shortfall, but the amount of federal funding that was lost is difficult to match. With the funding cuts have come fears that violence could surge again. Violence prevention is important because of the human costs, said Eleanor Kaufman, a professor of surgery at the University of Pennsylvania and the medical director of a hospital-based violence intervention program. I do expect that we'll see increase in death because we are taking away these essential supports that have proven beneficial. In Atlanta, Mr. Sanders and his team used to be a visible force in the English Avenue neighborhood, easily spotted in their purple t-shirts. After the spate of violence that followed his program's closure, Mr. Sanders stopped searching for another full-time job, took on part-time work, and spent his free time with one of his former co-workers trying to prevent more fighting. He said he would rather continue his intervention work unpaid than step away from the neighborhood. We were a daily reminder of, hey man, you don't got to do it like that. It don't take a gun to settle every situation, Mr. Sanders said. But now that reminder is gone. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. AI Prompting Writing Revival in Classrooms by Dana Goldstein, Lewisboro, New York. For today's high school and college students, the all-night writing session, hunched over a laptop at home or in a library carrel, is on the way out. In the era of artificial intelligence, take-home writing assignments have become so difficult to police for integrity that many educators have simply stopped assigning them. Instead, in a rapid shift, teachers are requiring students to write inside the classroom, where they can be observed. Assignments have changed too, with some educators prompting students to reflect on their personal reactions to what they've learned and read, the type of writing that AI struggles to credibly produce. This transformation is happening across the educational landscape, from suburban districts and urban charter schools to community colleges and the Ivy League. The New York Times heard from nearly 400 college and high school educators who responded to a call-out about how generative AI is changing writing instruction. Almost all described a deep rethinking of how to teach writing, and whether it still matters, since AI has become a better writer than most students and adults, they said. Teachers are responding to a widespread challenge. Over the past year, AI use has become ubiquitous among American students. Between May and December of 2025, the share of American middle school, high school, and college students who reported regularly using AI for homework increased from 48 to 62%, according to polling from RAND, even as 2/3 of students said the technology harmed critical thinking skills. 1/3 of the students reported using AI to draft or revise writing. Chatbots can easily produce polished essays in response to any prompt, analyzing Supreme Court cases, parsing symbolism in The Great Gatsby, explaining the science behind the Artemis mission. AI-powered browser extensions allow students to instantly generate and revise text as they complete online assignments. The tools are able to find and replace language in student writing that could trigger AI detection software, and can also rephrase published writing into new text that students can turn in as their own. Educators consider many of these uses akin to plagiarism, but some are also worried about students falling behind the curve of a technology that is reshaping the economy and day-to-day life. The standard curriculum was a thesis-driven research essay that students completed on their own time outside of class, said Mark Watkins, who directs the AI Institute for Teachers at the University of Mississippi. That is, unfortunately, gone. Over the past year, Jessica Binney, 49, overhauled her English classroom at John Jay High School in the Katonah-Lewisboro School District, north of New York City. She gave up on assigning 3 to 5 page papers, once a staple of the homework in her advanced placement classes. Now her students write in-class essays, either by hand or on a laptop with a locked-down browser. Ms. Binney regrets the loss of depth that longer assignments could produce, but she and many other educators who've moved writing into the classroom described relief at being able to abandon the highly imperfect science of AI detection. Student reliance on chatbots had gotten worse and worse as the technology gained sophistication, Ms. Binney said. One April afternoon in her AP Literature class, Ms. Binney read aloud 14, a poem by the St. Lucian Nobel laureate Derek Walcott. It describes the poet and his brother as children, trekking into the Caribbean forest to listen at the feet of a traditional storyteller. Walcott's language is lush and challenging. Students marked up paper handouts of the text, underlining and scrawling in the margins. Then they took out notebooks and began to draft essays analyzing literary devices. I want you to write out a really rough, terrible draft in your writer's notebooks, Ms. Binney told them, and then I want you to scratch it out and rewrite it. There was nary a laptop or tablet in sight. For these juniors and seniors, who have been taught on screens for much of their schooling, Ms. Binney's class can be a welcome break. It's a relief, said Cassidy Tondorf, 17. There's less distraction. Her classmate, Naomi Siegel, also 17, agreed. I'm able to connect with people more easily throughout the class because we're not as much on our computers. If there is a downside, it is that today's teenagers have little experience writing with pens and pencils. Their handwriting can be atrocious. Still, many educators said they were willing to deal with that inconvenience in order to ensure that they were grading authentic student work. At Kingsborough Community College in Brooklyn, Matthew Gartner said that because of AI overuse, he now has his freshman composition students write on paper in the classroom for 30 minutes, then share their drafts immediately in small groups. It creates connection and a desire to communicate well, he said. Jane Marie Law, a religious studies professor at Cornell, said she recently realized that despite asking her students to sign an honor code promising not to use AI for writing, they were still doing so. Gone were any errors, she said. Also gone was a sense of freshness and daring. ChatGPT made everything so safe. This fall, she plans to move toward mandatory in-class writing by hand. At the University of Virginia, Devin Donovan, who teaches writing and rhetoric, requires students to write on paper in class and revise drafts using scissors and tape to cut up and reorder paragraphs. At the end of the semester, a final piece is polished and submitted via computer, a common approach. I've moved past the idea of catching people or punishing this, Professor Donovan said of AI. His new method fosters a real person-to-person experience, which is sort of unfakeable. Most teachers and students are navigating AI without clear guidance from school administrators or policymakers. Leaders have denounced cheating, but have also praised the technology's promise, often without offering many specifics on how students should and should not be using AI. Young people are using it. Recent studies of ChatGPT and of Anthropic's Claude chatbox show that help with schoolwork is among the most popular uses of generative AI. When it comes to writing, 2/3 of ChatGPT queries ask for edits or translation. A third ask the chatbots to generate text from scratch. The Times is suing OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, claiming that it violated copyright when developing its models. The company has denied those claims. Megan Hart, an English teacher at South Forsyth High School outside of Atlanta, said that last year she noticed take-home essays returned sounding eerily similar and formulaic. At the same time, her district has encouraged teachers to get comfortable with generative AI, she said. Several of Dr. Hart's former students have told her they use AI frequently in their adult jobs, helping to convince her that teenagers need to develop AI skills. Now, she requires students to complete most writing in the classroom, but she also teaches them how to use AI to find reliable sources for research papers. And she has worked with students to use AI to solicit feedback on drafts. The kids have to build that critical thinking, she said, including fact-checking the information AI provides. This is an assistant that is here to help me, but it can also make me really look like an idiot. Breton Sheridan, who teaches English at a Philadelphia charter high school, has prioritized in-classroom reading and writing, oral presentations, and debates. The problem with AI, Mr. Sheridan said, was that while adults who have mastered basic skills may use AI on the job, teenagers have not yet grasped those basics. They are using generative AI to write before they learn how to write. They are reading ChatGPT summaries of a book before they have ever read a book, he said. The result is a diminished population. But he noted that schools serving low-income students like his are often under the most pressure to show that they are embracing innovative technology and preparing students for the working world, where it may soon be standard to rely on generative AI. The shift toward in-classroom writing is part of a broader conversation about how educators can counteract the negative impact of screen time on attention and learning. Laptops, tablets, and gamified learning apps entered most classrooms over the past decade, but there is little evidence they increased student achievement. Rather, test scores declined over the same period, especially in reading. Still, the tech industry continues to aggressively market its products to schools. Some AI startups are appealing directly to students through funny, tongue-in-cheek social media videos featuring attractive young influencers. The videos coach students on how to use generative AI to breeze through writing-related coursework. Educators said that while AI may be helpful for research and revision, they still want students to face down the blank page and craft original text. Daniel Herman, who teaches humanities at Maybach High School, a private school in Berkeley, California, said he continues to see student writing as essential to help them become better readers, thinkers, and explorers of the world and their mind. Teenagers said they were eager for adults to guide them on how to use AI ethically and productively. It's really concerning how dependent we are, said Ms. Siegel, the John Jay Sr. She hopes to become a defense attorney and recently decided to reel back her use of AI for editing because she found it introduced a stilted voice into her writing. But, she added, we're getting into a world of technology and we have to learn how to allow it to benefit us. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In primaries, Trump targets the disloyal by Shane Goldmacher. President Trump has spent the past year using the federal government to target those he considered his political enemies. Now, in a series of primaries this month, he is turning his ire on fellow Republicans by asking voters to punish those who have crossed him. Contests in Indiana, Louisiana, and Kentucky in the coming weeks all feature Trump-backed challengers trying to oust Republican incumbents who have earned Mr. Trump's anger. The fights have soaked up energy and cash from the president's allies and his political operation, pulling attention away from the broader battle with Democrats over control of Congress this fall. In Indiana, Mr. Trump hopes to oust a half-dozen Republican state senators who defied him by defeating a redistricting effort that would have drawn the state's 2 Democratic House members out of power. In Louisiana, he is backing a challenger to a Republican senator, Bill Cassidy, who voted to convict him in his second impeachment trial after the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. In Georgia, Mr. Trump is supporting a candidate for governor who is running against the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who refused to help the president find votes for him in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And in Kentucky, Mr. Trump is invested in unseating one particularly irksome Republican congressman who has refused to vote for the president's full agenda. We've got to get rid of this loser, Mr. Trump said at a March rally in Representative Thomas Massey's Northern Kentucky district, a deeply conservative swath encompassing suburbs of Cincinnati. Mr. Massey has openly challenged Mr. Trump in a way that no other congressional Republican seeking re-election this year has done, even as he has stressed that he sided with Mr. Trump on roughly 90% of votes. I say, look, if they're bankrupting the country or covering up for pedophiles or starting another war or spying on you without a warrant, I'm sorry, that's when I deviate from the party, Mr. Massey said in an interview. That's the 10% we're talking about here. Since returning to office last year, Mr. Trump's administration has focused intently on punishing the president's perceived enemies, firing them, investigating them, charging them with crimes. The extension of this retribution tour into the midterm landscape has bothered some fellow Republicans who have grumbled in public and private that Mr. Trump is more engaged in campaigns of vengeance than in maneuvering to save the party's narrow congressional majorities. Mr. Trump personally recruited some challengers who will appear on the ballot this month, and he has posed with most of them for photos behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office for their use in campaign ads. His advisors and allies are overseeing some of the primary efforts. Retribution is not a Christian value, said Travis Holdman, one of the Indiana Republican state senators being targeted, who said the millions being spent against him and his colleagues would have been better directed against the lone congressional Democrat in his state who holds a swing seat. David McIntosh, the head of the Club for Growth, a conservative group focused on economic issues that is spending $2 million to defeat the incumbent state senators, had a ready retort. If that senator had helped us pass redistricting, he said, we wouldn't need to. For close to a decade now, Mr. Trump's endorsement has been the most coveted and powerful in Republican primaries, and the president closely tracks his win-loss record as a measure of his potency inside the party. With the Republican Party, it's like 399 and 0, Mr. Trump bragged in a radio appearance last fall with characteristic exaggeration. Think of that. And many of those are insurgents. While his record is not 399 to 0, Mr. Trump has sought to punish Republican critics in primaries before, with great success. Only 2 of the 10 House Republicans who had voted for his impeachment survived the 2022 primary season. The rest either opted to retire or lost, including former Representative Liz Cheney. Delaney Bomar, a spokeswoman for the Republican National Committee, said that Republicans were aligned with Mr. Trump for good reason. He is the key to victory in these ruby red states. So far, the slate of May 2026 primaries represents Mr. Trump's biggest electoral effort to impose party discipline at the ballot box in his second term. Polls show his public support has dropped, but he remains broadly popular among Republicans. A large reason they're attacking me, Mr. Massey explained, is to keep the other Republican members of Congress in line. The first crack comes on Tuesday, when Mr. Trump is seeking to oust 7 Republican state legislators in Indiana who helped defeat his effort to carve up the state's congressional map. Millions of dollars have poured into support the Republican challengers, including from such Trump allies as the Club for Growth and a nonprofit group aligned with Jim Banks, one of Indiana's 2 Republican senators. It's important that we bring in new members in the Republican, very red state of Indiana who understand, as elected officials, they're part of a larger team, Mr. McIntosh said, adding that they had a good shot to defeat all the incumbents and win one open race. One ad compared a Republican who voted against the new maps to toilet paper, calling him soft, weak, liberal. Another ad boosted his challenger using Mr. Trump's name no fewer than 4 times in 15 seconds. Mr. Trump's intervention had warped the usual rules of engagement in local races, said Mike O'Brien, a Republican strategist in Indiana. In any other world, in any other time, a bunch of DC consultants start firing ads from Virginia to Indiana, it is a negative, and we would have rallied and protected our guys, Mr. O'Brien said. That is just not the world we live in right now. Some of the Indiana insurgent campaigns have been haphazard. Blake Feichter, a Bluffton, Indiana city councilman, entered the race with Mr. Trump's endorsement in January and then withdrew in February. I felt like I was on a raft alone trying to navigate, he told a local TV station. 2 weeks later, he was back in after meeting Mr. Trump in Washington. No race has become as acrimonious or personal as the campaign against Mr. Massey, a libertarian who opposed some of the president's signature initiatives and worked with Democrats last year to pass legislation forcing the release of files related to Jeffrey Epstein, the deceased sex offender and one-time Trump friend. Mr. Trump has disparaged Mr. Massey as the worst, a loser, a nut job, a disaster for our party, and disloyal, all at a single event. In February, Mr. Trump targeted Mr. Massey's new wife, suggesting that this new union all went so fast that maybe he didn't know what he was getting into. The airwaves have been flooded with attacks, including from one super PAC helmed by a top Trump political advisor, Chris LaCivita, that has spent $4.5 million since last summer. It's in these times, Mr. Massey said in an interview, I'm glad I don't own a TV. The president said he personally recruited Mr. Massey's challenger, Ed Gallrein, a former Navy SEAL, into the race, calling him central casting during his rally in March. Mr. Trump also joked that he needed only a warm body to beat Mr. Massey. He's politically toast, Mr. LaCivita confidently said of Mr. Massey. He just does not admit it yet. Mr. Massey, meanwhile, forecast that the president's team would wake up after his May 19th primary with a political hangover. He also criticized the outside spending as a divisive distraction from the goal of keeping Republicans in power. He keeps shrinking the tent, and he's going to need the whole tent in November, Mr. Massey said. In Louisiana, Mr. Trump endorsed Representative Julia Letlow against Mr. Cassidy in January. In recent months, Mr. Cassidy and his allies have outspent Ms. Letlow 4-1 on the airwaves, casting her as a liberal and using past video of her applying for a university post and saying, "We need a division of diversity, equity, and inclusion." Mr. Trump's support for Ms. Letlow has included appearing with her at Mar-a-Lago recently and filming a 2-minute video praising her as loyal as can be. On Thursday, he turned his ire on Mr. Cassidy, whose vote he still needs in the Senate, calling him a very disloyal person in one social media post and urging his ouster in a second. Notably, neither mentioned Ms. Letlow. The latest flare-up was over how Mr. Cassidy, who is a physician, did not support the president's nominee for Surgeon General, whom Mr. Trump withdrew on Thursday. The primary is May 16th, but the presence of a third candidate, John Fleming, the state treasurer, means the top 2 vote-getters are likely to go into a runoff. Mr. Trump has not endorsed anyone in the open Georgia Senate primary in May, but he is backing Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, an outspoken pro-Trump Republican, for governor. People around Mr. Trump said he was focused on ensuring that Mr. Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, did not win the nomination. Mr. Raffensperger was the state's top election official in 2020 who called out the president when he falsely claimed he had won Georgia. A third candidate, Rick Jackson, has spent millions of dollars on ads selling himself as a Trump-like outsider taking on the establishment. President Trump doesn't play by their rules. That's why I gave him $1 million, Mr. Jackson says in one ad. Trump wins over and over and over. Hearings for now about attack at the press gala by Nicholas Niehamas and Eileen Sullivan, Washington. The head of the Secret Service has held a series of private meetings last week with members of Congress, defending his agency's handling of the thwarted attack at last Saturday's White House Correspondents' Dinner, assuring lawmakers that his agency handled the incident well. So far, the Secret Service's efforts seem to have headed off the possibility of wide-ranging hearings on Capitol Hill, like those that took place after another lone gunman nearly took President Trump's life in Butler, Pennsylvania 2 years ago. But definitive answers about the most recent attack remain elusive, including how the gunman, who possessed little tactical training, managed to breach a secure checkpoint before being subdued, and whether an officer was hit by friendly fire. More broadly, some members of Congress and former agency officials have questioned the wisdom of allowing Mr. Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and many other top officials to gather in one place for public events, making the line of presidential succession an easier target for a more organized attack. The episode has also resurfaced long-standing questions about whether the Secret Service, long bedeviled by staffing shortages and management problems, is equipped to protect Mr. Trump and other top officials at a time of heightened political violence. The assassination attempt in Butler, where a gunman was able to fire his weapon from a nearby rooftop, marked the worst failure by the agency since President Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981, coincidentally also at the Hilton La Hotel in Washington, where the press gala was held. The stakes remain high, with high-profile events on the horizon, including the World Cup, the festivities for the nation's 250th anniversary, and the 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. I don't want anything left unanswered, said Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, the top Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee. Anytime somebody can penetrate the system that close, you really want to know if there's something we missed. Mr. Thompson met with the Secret Service Director Sean Curran on Wednesday to discuss the attack on the dinner, including the fact that the gunman had gained access to the hotel by booking a room in advance. Mr. Thompson said the director had told him that the agency had provided about the best security that could have been offered, and also that vetting hotel guests could potentially violate privacy laws. But Mr. Thompson said he would ask his Republican counterpart to hold a hearing examining the incident more closely. Representative Andrew Garbarino, the New York Republican who heads the Homeland Security Committee, said in a statement that he remained in active discussions with the Secret Service about holding a briefing on Capitol Hill, but did not say he would seek a public hearing. Earlier last week, Senator Josh Hawley, a Missouri Republican, called for a hearing to assess the adequacy of presidential security arrangements and resources and to review the degree to which post-Butler reforms have been implemented, according to a letter he sent to Senator Rand Paul, the chairman of the Senate's Homeland Security Committee. Neither Mr. Hawley nor Mr. Paul responded to requests for comment. One Democrat who met with Mr. Curran said he believed the response had been successful. Senator Richard J. Durbin of Illinois told reporters on Monday that the agency had a good plan to protect all of the guests, but especially the president, and that he saw no indication of a security lapse. A spokesman for the Secret Service did not respond to requests for comment. Former Secret Service agents said they agreed that presidential security should be reviewed and that complacency is always a worry, particularly when the agency is protecting venues it has worked in for many years. The Washington Hilton, for instance, has hosted the Correspondents' Dinner since the 1960s, with presidents frequently in attendance. You have to look at it with fresh eyes all the time, said Christopher Stanley, a former deputy assistant director of the agency. It's familiar territory, but the planning has to be continually re-examined. The attempted attack on Saturday represented the third time in 2 years that a lone gunman had managed to challenge the Secret Service, an agency with an annual budget of more than $3 billion. After breaching the Secret Service security checkpoint, the gunman, identified by authorities as Cole Thomas Allen, was stopped as he sped toward the ballroom, which was one level down from the checkpoint. In a note that law enforcement officials said Mr. Allen wrote before the attack, he commented on what he felt were inadequate security measures, including the fact that no one thought about what happens if someone checks in the day before. Mr. Trump in the White House praised the agency's swift response at the dinner. As President Trump has repeatedly said, he has full confidence in the brave men and women of the Secret Service, Davis Ingle, a White House spokesman, said in a statement. Even so, the White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles held a meeting on Monday with senior leadership at the Secret Service and its parent agency, the Homeland Security Department, to discuss the attack and ensure the president has the protection he needs at similar events in the future. Almost immediately after the attempted attack on Saturday, the Secret Service faced questions about what some attendees described as lax security based on the visible measures in place. We were there front and center. That venue wasn't built to accommodate an event with the line of succession for the U.S. government, said Senator John Fetterman, Democrat of Pennsylvania. Such security concerns are similar to those some in the Secret Service have raised for decades regarding the event at the Washington Hilton, former agents said. The hotel is not completely sealed off because it is a public space and guests come and go freely. The ballroom itself is crowded. As the chaos unfolded last Saturday night, C-SPAN viewers could see it was difficult for security details to reach officials. White House chiefs of staff in previous administrations said they had never spent much time considering what now seem like obvious security risks ahead of the clubby gathering that brought together high-profile politicians, journalists, and celebrities, often to laugh at jokes delivered from the dais by presidents and comedians. I'd always look at the speech to make sure it wasn't too mean in any places and that the jokes were all appropriate, said Ron Klain, who ran the White House under President Joseph R. Biden Jr. It was always secured by the Secret Service and seemed like a safe event. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 3rd issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Kathy. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that, at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability